Welcome to Family Group Night. I'm really excited for tonight's topic. Today is a topic that a lot of people have requested, and so I'm excited to introduce Rachael Cushing Cook, our clinical director. Rachael, you can take it away.
Hello. I'm so glad to see you all here to do this again. The last time I gave this talk was in 2016, and I know that there have been a lot of requests for it again, and obviously it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So let's get right to it. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it? Good? Okay, great. So a little bit of background. The youngest sibling of my family, has autism, and she was diagnosed when I was a senior in high school, so she's a lot younger, with moderate to severe autism, and we'd never heard of what that was, and there wasn't a lot of information out there on what to do, and her behaviors were very significant, and I can tell you, as you all know, it takes an effect on the family for sure. But she's now one of my best friends, and I'm so grateful for her. My entire family is grateful for her and all that we've learned from her. Okay, well, as many of you know, the prevalence of children experiencing autism is on the rise. There are significantly more parents raising children with autism, more siblings managing their feelings associated with having a brother or sister with autism. The CDC recently released results of a study of the prevalence of autism. They reported that autism occurs now in 1 out of 54 children. When my sister was diagnosed, the numbers were way far behind, but my mother was told it was 1 in 10,000, and that was 1993, which is pretty incredible. So, you know, my mom was like, why would this happen to our family? You know, 1 in 10,000. Now we know it was a little bit higher, but they didn't have the numbers. And it should also be pointed out that these data are from numbers collected in 2016. So if autism is on the rise 10 to 17% a year, and these data are 4 years old, we know that the incidence is a lot higher. And I did some calculations, and if it were to continue just at 10% growth, it would be more accurate at 1 in 43. Boys are still 4 times more likely to have autism, and now that number is 1 in 37. The numbers that I had in 2016, and I couldn't find newer ones, but that one child is diagnosed every 20 minutes, and I wonder now if they're diagnosed in less time. But even so, think about that. I mean, that means what, 3 kids are going to be diagnosed before the end of this talk, just before the end of this talk, which is crazy. So my objective for you today is to discuss what research has shown about siblings and ways that we can support them. I want to talk with you both about the realities, which can include struggles for siblings, and also the beauties of having a sibling with autism. So the definition of sibling is a person's brother or sister, but really the functional definition of a sibling is these are the people that we practice our skills on and we learn from, and they teach us about fairness and cooperation and kindness and caring, and most often it's the hard way. We learn our interpersonal skills through them, the way that we communicate with one another, the way that we resolve conflicts and self-regulate. Pretty important. So let's talk a little bit about the important roles of brothers and sisters. So siblings experience and have the feelings of their brothers or sisters with special needs, and research has shown that they parallel that experience of their parents. Not just in the fact that they are watching their parents and learning from how they react, but also have a lot of the same reactions that parents experience, you know, sadness and grief, but also super grateful for small gains and are very protective. Brothers and sisters will most likely have the longest lasting relationship, even longer than parents, and nobody will spend more time together over the long run than siblings. And no child, even in the inclusive classroom setting, will have a greater impact on a sibling's social development than their typical brother and sister. I am always so happy when I hear that there's a sibling in the home of a family that I'm getting ready to serve. I'm like, yes, that's a win-win right there. Typical children may act as role models to their younger siblings with autism. Research keeps talking about to their younger siblings, but I work with a lot of families who have had children after the child with autism, and they're just as effective for teaching social development. Siblings are far more likely to pull a child with autism out of their shell and force them to play than a peer in a classroom would. They just have more patience and they don't give up. Siblings usually will not, which allows for more social practice and addresses one of the core deficits of autism. So it's really a win-win. So this was taken quite a while ago, but these are my sisters. On the left is my sister Jessica. I'm on the right, and my sister with autism is Catherine, and she's in the middle. So why do we want to focus on sibling relationships? Well, again, most likely the siblings are going to be the ones to outlive their parents, but due to medical advances too, people with disabilities are also outliving their parents. You know, most states can't afford to pay for a child with a disability to go into a center-based care, especially as we saw with autism rates rising. It's just not realistic to think that there will necessarily be a center base for these guys to go to after parents are gone. And it is assumed that adult siblings will be the caregivers, the future caregivers for most of their disabled brothers and sisters. This is true for my family. When I bought my home in Hendersonville, I picked it specifically and mostly because it had an in-law suite. And I know that one day my sister will be in my care. And so I'm starting to prepare for that. I really like this quote. We will become caregivers for our siblings when our parents no longer can. Anyone interested in the welfare of people with disabilities ought to also be interested in us. Okay, so I'm going to show some research on the effects of siblings. But I want to speak to the limitations that there have been up until recently. There have been very few longitudinal studies on siblings of kids with autism. There were strong cohort effects, meaning just the groups that they picked may have responded differently than different groups. There was a wide range of ages, you know, and as we develop, we change emotionally and socially. So to compare a younger kid with an older kid isn't really fair. Most studies are self-reports, which some of us know may or may not be objective. And some of the findings were dependent on measures used. So it was the way that they were measuring it that got the results they want. But even with these limitations, I have been reading that more research efforts are being made to improve in these areas. And as a scientist, I can't ignore the data, so I need to share that with you. Kaminsky and Dewey compared sibling relationships of children with autism versus siblings of children with Down syndrome, and then of course against control, which is siblings of typically developing children. And what they found was sibling relationships and families with children with autism were characterized by less intimacy, less pro-social behavior, and less nurturance compared to siblings of Down syndrome and control. But they also reported greater admiration of their sibling, there was less quarreling with their sibling, and greater empathy overall. So some pros and cons. Macks and Reeve compared the psychosocial and emotional adjustment of siblings of children with autism versus controls. And what they found was that having a sibling with autism enhanced these psychosocial and emotional adjustment when demographic risks are limited. And this is where it gets interesting. And that having a sibling with autism was detrimental to growth and development as demographic risks increased. So now we're bringing in more of an environmental control over how a sibling is going to respond to having a child in their family with autism. And a lot of it has to do with these demographic risks. So things like poverty, or poor communication in family, or poor parental coping skills led to the behaviors that were detrimental. All of those things, I've turned on the flip side, were very helpful. So good communication within the family, demonstrating appropriate coping skills, those are some of the things that helped for sure. And they also found that those kids from more positive demographic backgrounds had more positive self-concept, more positive view of their intelligence and behavior, greater levels of maturity, and they had better problem-solving skills than controls, which is really interesting because the controls are siblings of kids who are with typical development. These guys demonstrated higher levels of these important skills because demographics and having a sibling with autism. So the final study I want to share with you is 2 meta-analyses of sibling research. So these guys looked through 60 different studies and compiled it all together. And within all of the 60 studies, there were over 6,000 siblings with autism. They came up with a term that I had not heard before, where they were looking at both the genes effect on siblings and the environment. And they called this the broad autism phenotype. And I'm not going to get into this too much, but I thought it was really interesting because they're starting to find out that the neurotypical siblings and even parents of kids with autism, there's a high degree of traits that are secondary conditions associated with autism. It's sort of like the touch of autism. They don't reach criteria, but they've got a bit of a touch of autism. So their findings were that overall, that siblings are more withdrawn and have poor social skills. They fare worse socially and emotionally than siblings of children with even intellectual disabilities or other forms of developmental delay. But they are not more likely to be aggressive or cope with adversity differently. So their overall findings is that siblings really could benefit from evidence-based treatments for internalizing and other psychological symptoms. So as we're addressing the needs of our kids with autism, we may need to address more formally the needs of the siblings too. And so if it's withdrawn and poor social skills, perhaps the siblings need some social skills training too. Perhaps they need some therapy on how to effectively express themselves. I like this. This is sort of nerdy, so I won't spend too much time on it because I know not everyone shares my sentiment. But what I really like about this is we have evolved in our understanding of the effects of autism on siblings. You know, after all that I just read you, I think it's easy to say, well, having a kid with autism makes you withdraw. No, it's a lot more than that. There are wider system levels influencing siblings in the family. This sibling embedded systems framework aims to conceptualize siblings' experiences and characterize the multiple and interacting factors influencing the family and the sibling outcome. Findings from studies that have reported outcomes for siblings are equivocal, ranging from negative impact, no difference, to positive experience, just like I just showed you. And these are likely due to the complex nature of understanding the sibling's experience. So this framework that you're looking at right here, it's not specific to disability research, but lends itself to particular contexts of understanding siblings of children with autism. It's a bioecological systems approach. It incorporates a series of nested levels from microsystems directly experienced by the sibling, the mesosystem interplay between these factors, through the exosystem in which the sibling does not directly participate, but is nonetheless affected by, to broader societal and cultural macrosystem factors. So within this framework, the child is not viewed as passive, but as actively shaping and being shaped by their environment. And this also takes into effect the genetic factors. And I show you this because I think it's important to understand that it's not just the event, and you can see that one right there, this event of having a sibling with autism that determines outcomes for the siblings. It is a whole lot more. We can't control that the sibling has autism, but this lends itself to the notion that there are things we can control. And those things can make a difference for the children's emotional and social outcomes. So these are a list of compiled, reliable sources of stress that siblings have reported. They get embarrassed around their peers when their sibling is acting odd. They have jealousy regarding the amount of time parents have to spend with the child with autism. They're frustrated over not being able to engage or get a response from their brother or sister. I know my sister Jessica was always frustrated with that. She's only a year older than, about a year and a half older than Catherine, where I was 15 when Catherine was born. So, you know, I wasn't really playing with babies at that time, but she definitely wanted to play with Catherine and get very frustrated. Siblings are the target of aggressive behavior, and that's hard. A lot of siblings feel like this is a common theme, that they have to make up for the deficits of their brother or sister. You know, they have to be perfect. They have to get perfect grades. They can never mess up. They have to do everything right. They have a lot of concerns regarding their parents' stress and grief, and they pick up on all of that. And then later on, there are concerns over their role in the future caregiving of their sibling. So I present them here so that we can better understand how they are feeling, not to depress you all, but so if we can understand how these guys are reporting their feelings, then we can better address and ameliorate them. So let's talk about what we can do. The number one rule of thumb is to talk about autism early and often. And of course, the information that you're presenting has to be relevant to their developmental age and understanding. Young children are most often concerned about the unusual behaviors. It sort of puzzles them or frightens them. And so at that point, you know, we've gone about explaining like autism might be the flapping of the hands or the screaming that comes out, and that's what autism is. And older children are more bothered by the interpersonal concerns, such as having to explain autism to their friends. The more that you can give them the right words to use, the better. You want to have that healthy line of communication, like, hey, my friend called my brother this. Help them work through that and be able to advocate for their sibling in a positive manner. Again, adolescents are more concerned with long-term needs of their sibling and the role that they will play in the future. And I'm going to talk about this a couple more times, but we definitely need to work together with the adolescents. I think that most families would want their child with autism to be cared for by a sibling after they're gone, but we want to make sure that the sibling knows the steps that we're going to take to support them and really find out if that's what they want to do. Again, children need to be told again and again, just because they can state back to you the things that you've told them about autism doesn't really mean that they fully understand it. They'll need to hear it in increasingly more mature terms, what autism is all about and what can be expected as they age. And if you're ever in doubt, just let their questions guide your discussion without judgment. That's probably the best advice I can give you, is let them vent, let them ask you the hard questions and try to work them out together. And if you don't have the answers, that's okay. You could say you don't have the answers, but that you'll help them find them. So since we are going to be around the longest with our siblings with autism, I think it's a parent's job to do as much as they can to form a positive relationship there, which is not always easy, even with neurotypical siblings. So one thing that you can do, and you are already doing now, is learn more about siblings and their relationships. And young children can be taught simple skills that will help them engage their brother or sister with autism. And this is not a comprehensive list, but it's just some ideas. When a sibling is trying to engage with their brother or sister with autism, teach them how to ensure they have attention before they ask them to play or ask them any questions. Make sure that they're attending to each other. Teach the siblings how to give simple, basic instructions, at least initially, so that they can ensure that the sibling understands them. Teach the siblings to allow time for processing and how to give expectant cues. That's a biggie. When you see the peers, they don't usually wait. And, us as therapists are always like, hold on, just wait a couple more, even just a couple seconds of processing can make the peer run away. So we have to teach the sibling how to, give him a few seconds. You're going to say something to him. It's going to take him a couple seconds longer to hear you, and then a couple seconds longer to determine how they want to respond. Teach them how to give expectant cues. Those are great social skills that a sibling can be teaching. And as a parent, catch them being good. When you see them and helping their brother or sister, let them know that you're proud of them. And also keep praising good play and any other personal strengths that you see of each of them. So here are some common statements that we hear from siblings as parents. Why won't he play with me? It's really hard for a child to understand why our kid will not play with them. So you want to try to find a common ground with the sibling. You want to make sure that he understands any limitations that their brother or sister may have. So, playing hangman with a child who can't spell or read may not be the best idea, but maybe they have great listening skills and basic communication. And so maybe Simon Says is a better game. But once you explain those limitations to the sibling, you're going to find better understanding and acceptance of that instead of frustration. Make sure you're providing specific suggestions on how they can play together. So, often with neurotypical children, you're like, I need to cook dinner, go play. More than likely, that's not going to work with the sibling of a kiddo with autism. So instead, why don't you go help Timmy draw this picture of watercolors of the flower? Make it very specific of what they should be playing together, and always make sure that you're encouraging any shared interest there. And help the child understand that play might be this is the sibling I'm talking about, help them understand that play may be highly repetitive and it might be different than what they're used to. And that's okay, because at least they're getting some kind of interaction. We know our kids on the spectrum want to do and play, especially with things that they like, repeatedly, while also respecting the wishes of the neurotypical sibling. So if they've already played Simon Says 10 times and the sibling is done, let them be done. We hear it's not fair all the time. All right, so we need to ensure that we're creating special time, that every child in the family feels special and valued. These times should be regular, meaning frequent, and when possible, separate from the child with autism. It's not necessary and probably not possible for each child in a family to receive the same amount of attention, but as long as you're striving for equity, you're doing the best that you can. I know of families who they'll just put the child with autism to bed 10 minutes before their other child, and that's their alone time before the other children go to bed. I know some who will have date nights, even if it's just a walk in the neighborhood. So the sibling has some time with mom alone, and then dad's watching the others, and then vice versa. You could make it as simple as that, but it's really important that they get that time. That was another area that my sister struggled with a lot, especially because my parents were implementing ABA at 40 hours a week for Catherine. And that's a lot. And my sister being, my other sister being maybe 5 or 6, having to see that and seeing therapists in and out of the house, and everything was surrounded around Catherine's therapy, my parents had to work very hard to ensure that she felt special too and valued and required just as much attention. But it wasn't easy. Some siblings feel scared. So make sure that you have a plan of how behavior issues are going to be handled, both in the home and in the community, because as we know, they do look very different. And let the whole family in on the plan. They're going to feel a lot safer if they know, okay, mom and dad are confident that if Jimmy decides to elope from Target, these are the steps that we're going to take. I'm going to stay with the basket or whatever, and mom's going to go after. You know, make sure that they know what to predict, because it can be scary when you have kids who demonstrate aggression and other dangerous behaviors. If behaviors are escalating and they do become aggressive, don't let the siblings work it out themselves. Make sure you step in to separate them safely. Teach the neurotypical siblings that there are triggers. There are always triggers that we can find if we have a child who's aggressive, and sometimes it's as simple as a little giggle. And you could teach them, okay, now's your time to step away. But pay attention to what those triggers are and share it with the rest of the family. And have signals for each other. This is one that I talk about a lot with parents. You know, when we're dealing with those maladaptive behaviors, it can get really frustrating. And when you have a child that won't back down or just engages in these long behaviors, we need to be able to pick up on the cues for one another that it's time for somebody to step out and take a break, and for somebody else to step in, without it being a huge production that just leads to everyone being super stressed out. So talk about that with each other. Create a word or a look or a hand gesture that means I'm out and I need a break. And just be able to communicate that with each other without judgment. This is another biggie for my sister, my poor sister. She was embarrassed. You know, Catherine had a lot of, still does, self-stimulatory behaviors. And when you're 12 and 13 and your friends are over and going, what's happening? Why is she squealing like that? Why is she flapping? It can be embarrassing when they're younger. So this is the best advice I can give you on this one, and I encourage you to share it with your other children. Encourage them to share with you the embarrassing moments and find a way to laugh. Acknowledge that the behaviors can be strange and look odd to others. Encourage a sense of humor. Okay, so I remember when my parents lived in Flat Rock, in a pretty affluent area, and getting a knock on the door that my sister had decided she was a big eloper, decided to leave the house to go ride her bike at about 7 years old on noon on a Saturday. And what we didn't realize is that she was 100% naked. Our neighbors were not that pleased, and we were, of course, completely embarrassed at the time. But this is something that we have laughed about for so hard, because, you know, it's just funny. And if you don't laugh at some of this stuff or find some humor in it, you're just gonna cry. And so isn't laughing a whole lot better when you can? And when the time's appropriate, encourage an assertiveness with peers. If peers are being bothered by some of the things that their peers are telling them, encourage them healthy ways to express what their siblings are going through, to express what autism is to their peers, and to try to elicit some compassion. Give them the words that they need to talk with their peers about this. Again, allow them to vent to you. If they can't get some emotional venting out, it's going to come out in another way, and it's not going to be pretty, like my sister in high school, my sister Jessica in high school. She was able to work through all of that, luckily, but you could definitely see some emotional responses through adolescence. And I think that if she would have been given the platform to emotionally vent, it wasn't like my parents were stopping her. I just don't think they knew. So it's really important to ask them these questions about how they're feeling and to be open to it without judgment. We never want to tell a sibling that what they're feeling is not okay. We want to just help them work through it. We've heard siblings say, I feel like the parent. As much as you can, let them be children too. Include them in the caretaking, because I think a lot of siblings, and I've done some sib groups too, and I've heard this, they want to help care for their brother and sister, but don't expect it. It's not their responsibility to care for them. Gosh, I can't tell you the anxiety that some siblings carry for their brother or sister. I ran a sib group a few years ago during family group night. And, I had some 9-year-olds telling me they don't like to go to school because they worry about their brother being in a different classroom. Who's going to watch out for him? He's going to run away. Something bad's going to happen. I'm like, no 9-year-olds should have to carry that. But the fact is they do. They do. So we can't put more on them than what they're already carrying. So define appropriate and reasonable expectations for them. And make sure that you are expecting typical behavior from the typically developing sibling. Just because you let Johnny with autism get away with tantrums, you're not going to let your 10-year-old get away with tantrums, okay? You don't have to feel bad that you have different contingencies around the behaviors. They are different people, and so they require different expectations. And you obviously don't want to teach them that it's okay, that they have an excuse to act inappropriately. Again, discourage their commonly held belief that they have to make up for their brothers or sisters' limitations. They don't have to be perfect. They're gonna make mistakes in their life, and that is okay. We will deal with our own grief of what we're having to go through with the child with autism, and what the future is going to look like without having to put it on the other sibling to be at a higher level than you would have ever put on them otherwise. So we all have that one sibling, right? That would have been Jessica, the screaming one. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. On holidays and birthdays, especially for the sibling, if that's a real special time for them, and you're not sure that the child on the spectrum or with a disability will keep it that way, ask for other adults to help. Ask your friends, ask for family members to ensure that the special times for the siblings remain that way. And as challenging as it gets, make sure you maintain those special times with them, with the siblings. I know we all work, we're tired, we're dealing with the behaviors of autism. As much as you can, maintain the special times. And it's so important for parents. I'm not asking you to be perfect, because nobody's perfect. And I feel like when people hear this, it gives them permission or the strength to do better. But model appropriate coping techniques, like being calm and finding humor in those situations that are humorous. They say that a parent's perspective on a disability is more important than a stereotype of it on a sibling. If it is always hopeless, that's the perspective the other children will have. However, if it's openly communicated that sometimes it's hard, but the focus is on the blessings these children bring, the focus of the siblings will be to look for the possibilities and the blessings as they get older. Again, what's going to happen when my parents aren't here is a common concern. And this is interesting too, and I heard this from the younger ones too. When they think about having a family and children, there's a lot of concern on whether or not there's a genetic component to their siblings' autism, which we all know there is. And so I don't think you need to veer away from that. I just think you need to give them realistic information that, this is the percentage of siblings who go on to have children with autism. The highest is obviously between twins, and there's plenty of research out there that you could share this with them. And by the way, it's pretty low. They're going to feel a sense of responsibility for their brother or sister. The research has found that it will even stop siblings from going to college or leaving the home. So we really want to let them know that they have a right to live their own life and that you want to see them reach the goals that they have planned out for themselves as adults, and that it is okay to leave and still be involved with the family. So parents need to discuss with their older teenage children expectations they have in caring for the family member with autism. It's important to begin this discussion as early as the concerns grow as the parents age. You need to discuss living arrangements for the adult child with autism. I mean, my mom made it pretty clear to me, I will roll over in my grave if you let Catherine go into an institution. Luckily, I shared those sentiments. Not everybody does. And so you have to be able to work through that. You have to be able to plan for it, let them know that you are taking the steps to ensure that there are appropriate guardianship and living arrangements for them. And include them in the discussion about future care. I've loved that about my parents. I've known for 15 years now that Catherine will be mine, and I'm more than happy. I want to do this. The nice thing about that is that I've had 15 years and then hopefully many more to really work out the details, not only with my parents, but with Catherine on where she wants to live and what we want for her, and what she wants for herself. So all of that can be laid out before my parents leave. And reassure them about the legitimacy of their assuming their own role as adults. Again, you know, their role and value as an adult is not just to care for a sibling, it's also to follow their own dreams. And if they want to do both, they can do both. I'm a living example of that. And I've done it with the help of my parents too, and their support, figuring out how can I have my own family? I want to have children. I want to have this career. I also want to be the caretaker for my sister. This is the time to talk about it when they are becoming adults. So I wanted to share with you just some resources. I have a lot of them too, so I'm hoping that you guys can have access to them. But this is a great book for preschoolers' view of autism, getting to understand their peer or their sibling with autism. This is another one, Don't Bring Jeremy. It's about two brothers, friendship, and accepting. And this one won or was nominated for a bunch of awards. This is a great one too. I really like Donald Meyer and his work. He is the one who started Sibs support groups. So sibling support groups, which I really hope one day to get going in our area. It's ongoing sibling support, bringing them together, talking about the challenges, letting these siblings know that they're not alone. And answering the hard questions. Sorry, why? It's just, this is a fun middle school book, a sibling slam book. It's just a fun one where you could talk about the pros and cons and reflect the complex and conflicted mix of emotions that come with all of that, having a sibling with special needs. The Ride Together is a story, I think, that two siblings wrote about their brother David, who had autism, and how it's very honest and respectful and just discusses the effects on the family. And these were great links. These are relatively new ones that I've found. Great resources for printing off social stories or just pamphlets to explain to the sibling what autism is and the ways that they can deal with that and work with the family. There's great ideas for building relationships with siblings and strengthening those relationships as well. So I think Berta will make all of these available to you. So this is my beautiful sister, Catherine. She is so much more than a sister with autism. She's an amazing daughter and auntie to my son. She's a talented artist and vocalist, a staunch feminist, and an emerging badass in Taekwondo. She is the hardest working person I know, and I could not be more proud of the woman she has fought so hard to become. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Request to rewind the slide about sibling stress.
Embarrassment around peers, jealousy regarding the amount of time parents spend with the other sibling, frustration over not being able to engage or get a response from their sibling, being the target of aggressive behavior, trying to make up for the deficits of their brother or sister, concern regarding their parents' stress and grief, and then concern over their role in future caregiving. Those are the top sources of stress for siblings.
And know that if the special need that you guys are dealing with at home is not necessarily autism, I imagine that a lot of these tips would transfer over to other special needs as well.
Yes, definitely.
Might add, it also translates to the sibling with autism. And I'm dealing with a situation where both of my kids have autism, and at any given point, one of them acts like the typical one, and one of them acts like the one with the special needs, and so it translates very well to any of them.
Right, that makes sense. Of course, you would want to use all of these same techniques with the child on the spectrum as well if they were struggling. Definitely. And again, like I said, just because they can state the diagnostic criteria for autism doesn't mean they really understand it. Obviously not if he's getting frustrated. So if you could take some of that, not guilt, but if some of that blame off of the child, and if he understands it for what it really is, he's going to become less frustrated. There's some great books too, and just some simple basic print-offs that answer a lot of the common questions, especially now that he's entering his teenage years. Mm-hmm. You know, what other kids have asked and answers for that in those links that I have. In mind that all siblings argue, all siblings get frustrated with each other. We're not seeking perfection. We just want there to be a relationship there, and enough to where he's going to be really ambitious. And I think, you know, I'd say something like, that's wonderful. Please do strive for the mansion. Mom and dad want to live with you too, but you know what? It's okay if you don't, because we're going to put this, and this in place to ensure that he's taken care of. And you let us know how involved you want to be. Most of our siblings are very compassionate, connected, and they worry.
What specific tips do you have to make sure that the typical kid doesn't assume too much responsibility in the day-to-day happenings?
Yeah, you have to find the healthy balance there, I'd say, because if they want to help, you want to let them help. And I think you just need to keep telling them, like, you don't have to do this. And if they really insist, like, I really want to, and give them some basic things that they can do with help. Like you probably don't want to have them helping with the toileting and some of those other things that you know could just be aversive. Give them simple things that make them feel like they're accomplishing, that they're giving back to their brother or sister. It makes us feel good when we do that, because we know that they need help. But give them just some little things along the way and then praise them for that. Not the big things that you know can be stressful. I think if you just have an open line of communication and you express what it's doing to you, if it's overwhelming you, most siblings are going to naturally just step up and say, oh my gosh, what can I do? I didn't realize that you had taken all of this on. Most. If not, you might have to be a little more firm. Like, I need help. And here are the things that I'm doing. You can pick what you want to help from, but this is all that I feel like it's been falling on me. A little too much has fallen on me. Again, I really feel like if people know that there's a need, they're going to want to step up. At least one other sibling, I think, would want to step up and help. They may just not know I don't know what the specific situation is. And you get more firm or obvious about it, the more you get into it and you see that they may not be responding. But I think for the most part, siblings do respond if they know what the needs are. I also see where siblings will see one of them doing a great job and be like, wow, they've got it. They're good. They're doing it better than I could ever do it. So I think it's okay to say, it doesn't have to be perfect, guys. I just need help with this, this, and this. I think parents need, and I think I put that in one of my slides, they need to make those expectations perfectly clear for the siblings and make it with the siblings so that they're taking ownership of what the expectations are, if any. And then I know too, Caroline could speak to some of the new systems that are being put in place that parents can take advantage of, where they can set everything up the way that they want it to relieve stress for siblings before they leave this world. So we are getting a lot more into that these days than there ever was when Catherine was first diagnosed. There's a lot more systems in place that parents can take advantage of to ensure that, if there's a pot of money, it's here, or if this is the guardian that's going to take care of it, they can set it all up legally.
Yeah, and it's never a great idea to have it just be one person. It's the division of labor on that is pretty important for a lot of reasons. It's a lot of pressure for the one person to be in charge of all the money, all the resources, and all the care, and it's advantageous to set that up so that there's business and financial support that's separate from the day-to-day support, because systems for disabilities and adults with disability and laws change almost every year, and you need somebody who's going to be on top of that, and it's usually not the person who's doing the day-to-day care. And so it's really good to have sort of ancillary systems set up to relieve pressure.
On that note, we do have a really fantastic presentation coming up in 2 weeks. So as you know, we're doing family group night every other Monday now. Our next family group night, which is July 27th, will be presented by a team in Charlotte that dedicates just to that future planning, financial planning, guardianship, just getting the ball started, and what are the things that we need to even just be thinking about. And like Caroline said, having someone who knows those laws and having someone who understands how that works. So we invite you again to come back in 2 weeks if you can.